Hey guys, welcome back to Total Tactics FPL. It's Fran here and I'm back with a new video for the World Cup 22 Fantasy. Today's video will be looking at the chips that you have available for your team. Chips are basically boosters or power-ups that will actually strengthen your ability to get points within a specific match day. The idea behind chips is you can only use them at one match day and you can only use them once. This year we have 3 chips for our World Cup 22 Fantasy teams, and they are the 12th man, the power captain, and the wild card. What's interesting is the 12th man and the power captain concepts are quite new, and the wild card for a lot of people who have been playing fantasy football before is something that they're entirely used to. We also have a wild card effectively after the group stages are over because there's unlimited transfers. So whatever you pick and whatever players you have in match days 1 to 3, those will actually be removed, and effectively you have a wild card at your disposal. So you don't need to wild card in match day 1, neither do you need to wild card in match day 4, which is the round of 16. Anyways, let's actually go into the 12th man because I think this is one of the most interesting chips that we have at our disposal, and it seems like a pretty fun chip that will give us a great advantage, potentially early on in the group stage as well. The rules behind the chip are so on. You can bring in a 12th player in your team and there's no budget restrictions applied. The idea is if you, let's say, have 3 premium players in your team or even 2 premium players, let's say I have Messi, Mbappe, and Neymar as my front line for match day 1. If I was to use the chip on match day 1, I could actually add in De Bruyne or Kane to my team, or even someone like Cristiano Ronaldo, right? Because the idea is De Bruyne has a great game versus Canada, Kane has a great game versus Iran, Ronaldo also has a great game on Ghana, as long as he's able to make it in time and his stomach bug is over. So I'll be able to bring in these players and they'll actually sit in my team as the 12th player, as the 12th starter. The idea behind the chip, of course, is that there's only one use and you can only use it in one specific match day. However, you can't captain that player, and also that player will disappear in the subsequent match day. So if I, let's say, bring in Ronaldo for match day 1, versus Ghana, he'll play for me, he'll start on my team, I'll get his points no matter what, even if it's a negative point. If he gets a red card, for example, I'll have to actually take it in. I can't bench that player. And therefore, I then move into match day 2, and Ronaldo disappears from my team. The only way I can get Ronaldo back is to waste a transfer on him if I do so choose. The idea behind this chip is, and the main concern, of course, is it can't be undone. So whenever you lock the chip in and whenever it's applied, you cannot change that player once again. So if I, let's say, choose to add in Ronaldo for match day 1 to my team, that's the last time I can actually fix my 12th man. Ronaldo will sit permanently in my team because I've activated the chip, and that's how it's going to work. As far as how the chip actually works, this is exactly how it looks like on your screen when you activate the chip. So here I've decided to activate my 12th man chip over Harry Kane. He then sits in the top left corner of my team, and he basically joins as a permanent 12th starter for the team, and I get to use him for the entire of match day 1 if I was to use it in match day 1. Of course, this would apply for any other subsequent match day, and it will look exactly like this. As far as when to use the chip, this is very interesting because, as I said, the tournament is split into 2 stages. The group stages where you have the opportunity to punt on a lot of players and you don't really care about whether these players will get knocked out or whether they'll continue on because you have these unlimited transfers, as I said, right before the knockout stages. And the knockout stages are split between match day 4, which is going to represent the round of 16, match day 5, the quarterfinals, match day 6, the semifinals, and match day 7. The interesting thing about it compared to the Euros is that you now have the 3rd place match as well. So you actually do have an option to maybe change your captaincy this year for the finals because you get to potentially punt on a 3rd place match player. And that's, I think, quite interesting this year. As I said, though, if you're looking at the 12th man, I think the best times to use it are match day 1 and match day 3. The reason is because we don't really know what's going to happen for the knockout stages. We don't know who's going to be in the knockout stages. We don't know if there'll be easy matches or if all the matches are going to be extremely hard on paper and very hard to predict. Because of that, I think the best opportunities is just to look at the group stages. We already know what the fixtures are from match day 1 to match day 2 to match day 3. I think the best opportunities are match day 1 and match day 3 because a lot of teams have a lot of favorable matches. When you compare to, for example, something like match day 2, where Spain has to face Germany or Uruguay has to face Portugal, you can clearly see that there are a lot of top teams that do face each other in match day 2, and the ceiling is arguably lower because you have less of a need to maybe bring in a 3rd or 4th premium in your team, or even a 5th if you somehow afforded that sort of structure. Of course, you can still use it in match day 2, as I said. That really just depends on your team, and of course these chips, it's up to you how you use them, but I personally prefer match day 3 or match day 1. One of the issues behind match day 3, though, as I said, is the opportunity for the group stages to change radically. If you cast your eyes back into the previous World Cup with England having a rather good performance, they actually decided to effectively sack that last game versus Belgium and they played a B-string squad in match day 3. That allowed a lot of players from both teams to be rested because neither Belgium nor England wanted to actually win that game. And I would say this is an opportunity here for match day 3 to have a very low ceiling. You could see players be rested either for advantageous results or because they've already qualified to the next stage of the tournament. Let's say if Brazil wins the first 2 games of their tournament and everyone else has one win, one loss. That actually puts Brazil in a fantastic position to just rest someone like Neymar. So therefore, the ceiling of the 12-man chip could be very low in match day 3. Why I like using it in match day 1 is because I'm expecting all the big guns to play there. So therefore, you probably have 3 big guns in your team. You can just simply bring in a 4th one. And as you can see here, I've listed these match day 1 players in terms of goal scoring odds. We have someone like Messi, Mbappe at the top, we have Neymar and Ronaldo as well, and even someone like De Bruyne, who I don't think is expected to necessarily score, but he can get you a lot of key passes in that game, potentially even some tackles, and of course his assistive and creative levels haven't been reflected in a goal scoring odd chart. So these are the options you have, and of course you can look at other options too, outside shouts like Lewandowski, or if you really believe in some other punts like some of the Spanish players, like an Ansu Fati, then you can try and use the 12-man chip there. And what I like about using the chip early is it allows you to be flexible, and you don't really have to be waiting for advantageous and optimal results for you to actually pick a certain player later on, because you don't know exactly what's going to happen, whether you have a chance again to use Neymar, to use Mbappe, potentially as your 12th man, or someone else like a Kane or Ronaldo. The second chip we'll be looking at is the power captaincy chip. And this is actually dependent on how you interpret the rules to be in Fantasy 2022. As far as I understand, based on the English version of the rules, it seems like you can only change your captain once per match day. So the idea is, let's say if I start with match day 1 as an example to just discuss the captaincy rules, if I start with Messi as my first captain, and then I move the captaincy after Messi blanks in match day 1 to Mbappe when he faces Australia in match day 1, I therefore have Mbappe as my second captaincy and final captaincy choice. So that's how I interpret the rules to be, that you only have 2 chances effectively at choosing the right captain. However, some people seem to have interpreted the rules differently, so do keep that in mind. That's going to be a disclaimer for the video for the power captaincy chip as well. Some people do think that you can actually change your captaincy every day per match day. So we have the tournament starting on the 20th, so you could effectively maybe captain someone from the Qatar game, but I really don't think that's true. I think you really only have 2 goes at your captaincy, and I'm going to be creating my discussion of the power captaincy chip based on that understanding of the rules. So the rules as far as power captaincy go is that it'll give double points to your top scoring player that match day. So if I use the Messi example once again, what happens is if I start with Messi and he blanks in match day 1, then Mbappe plays Australia and he blanks in match day 1, my captaincy is automatically changed at the end of the match day to whoever scores the most points in that match day. So let's say I had Neymar in my team and he was the last to play. I didn't get the chance to actually move the captaincy and the armband to him, but Neymar ends up scoring a hat-trick, then all my captaincy points will actually be shifted towards Neymar, and my one captaincy for match day 1 will be Neymar. And that's the only time I can use that chip. Whatever match day I intend on using that chip, that's what I get for the power captaincy. So there could be some situations, of course, that are quite negative. Let's say if I had Mbappe as a captaincy versus Australia, and I had the power captaincy chip on, and he got 12 points, and then Neymar got 13 points, then of course the net positive that I'm really getting is that 1 point. And so therefore the chip can be quite explosive, and it also could be quite detrimental. So when is the actual best time to actually use the chip? In my opinion, you've got 2 opportunities. Match day 1, once again, because it's got such a great variety of games. And if you look at it from an argument where you look at the ceiling of your potential team and your team overall, so let's say if Messi and Mbappe blank, but I actually have 6 or 7 players who are fantastic matches, because match day 1 has a lot of big guns within the European and South American teams who actually have some nice matchups, then potentially, of course, I have a flexible range amount of options, such as a Cancelo who could maybe get 16, 17 points by getting a goal and a clean sheet, something like that, right? And therefore, it could be quite explosive there. However, as I said, of course, it could be quite detrimental if you already have such a great captaincy option in match day 1, and therefore the actual net benefit might not be as high as you wanted. You could also use it in the knockout stages, and I think the kind of ceiling argument is there once again. If we use it in match day 4, because we technically get a free wild card with the unlimited transfers from moving from the group stages to the knockouts, we should have a team that's very, very strong for match day 4, and we have those 2 goes of the captaincies. If we get them wrong, the idea is we still have a very, very strong core. We would have just changed our team to as strong as it possibly could have been. and therefore I have someone to fill in the gaps as my third captain, and I get the huge kind of explosive net haul of a much better captain around a 16. The alternative argument is that, let's say if you quarterfinal wildcard as well, you have once again another chance to reapply this argument towards the semifinals, where hopefully with the added transfers you get at that stage of the tournament, you should have once again a great opportunity to get a great captaincy punt. As far as the finals, a lot of people actually think that the power captaincy is best used in the finals, and I actually disagree. I think it can be used in a lot of the match days, and I think this should be your most flexible chip, because it really depends on when you play the wild card, when you have a very strong team available, and maybe even some weeks specifically where you think that the ceiling is very low and you have no idea who to guess the captaincy on. It could be very good because you could still end up having someone on your bench, maybe someone like a Sosa at 3.5, who could still have a ridiculous game week, something that nets him something like 17 points, with the same Cancelo example, and you would have totally omitted that by going for something into match day 3 where your Neymar, your Messi, your Mbappe is all rested. Some people think that you can actually use in the finals though, and as I've been discussing, based on my interpretation of the rules, I think the third place match in the World Cup is actually going to be included within match day 7. So that means you still have an opportunity in the finals and in match day 7 to probably captain someone from that third place match and then move the captaincy towards someone in the finals match. And based on that, I think you therefore kind of discount the argument that, oh, I've got less goes at the captaincy, because every match day you should technically have had 2 goes to change your captain. So the ceiling potentially in the finals is actually very low. So when you compare it to match day 1, where of course you have much better captaincy options to pick from in the first place, and you have some great backup options, match day 7 is very different, because it could be where you have very tough captaincy options, and the games are extremely tough, very hard to predict, very low scoring based on a lot of finals and semifinals that we've seen in the past, or even third place matches, of course. But ultimately you get saved and you get salvaged by the chip. As I said, this is very variable. It really just depends on whether you're actually able to, get a huge net benefit. And as I said, this is the most variable chip. It really depends on how you play fantasy out. I would recommend saving it. I wouldn't use it in match day 1, but it's an option there, of course, if you want to get a head start versus everyone else in the population. But yeah, that's the power captaincy chip. And I think it's an interesting chip, but it could be terrible and it could be fantastic. The third and final chip is going to be the wildcard chip. And this is something that a lot of fantasy football players have already gotten used to as a chip. So I think the rules won't be necessarily new for you here. But if you're new to football fantasy and you're new to FIFA fantasy, then the wildcard is something where you get unlimited transfers for one match day. You can't use the chip in match day 1, which is going to be the first set of group stage games, or match day 4, which is going to be the first set of knockout stage games. And that's because you already get unlimited transfers for those games. As we talked about in the video, you have these unlimited transfers that happen after the group stages are over. So you don't need to waste a wildcard on match day 1 or match day 4. Therefore, I think the only opportunity to really use the wildcard is in match day 2, match day 3, or match day 5. And we'll go through the pros and cons right now. For me, if you're going for a match day 2 wildcard pick, one of the cons immediately is you might not really prepare for what's to happen in match day 3, because you would have only gotten the results in match day 1 in mind. You might have even built your team in match day 1 with a match day 2 wildcard strategy, and you might not even account for some of the unpredictable results. As we talked about in years past, we've seen some teams majorly rest a lot of their players in match day 3, particularly if they've already progressed to the next round of the group stage, or if they don't particularly care about whether they qualify as the first place seed or the second place seed. We saw that, as I said, with the example with England versus Belgium in the previous World Cup, and it was a very dire game to watch. But also consequentially for fantasy, if you had players like De Bruyne, had players like Kane, they weren't playing that game, and you would have suffered as a result. However, there are some huge pros, of course. If you go for a match day 2 wildcard strategy and you actually actively, mindfully change your team in match day 1 to accommodate for that, you could go for a huge punt where you go for players from France, players from Spain, and players for Germany, because these are all teams that have arguably tougher games in match day 2. Spain versus Germany is a mirror matchup. So if you went for a Spanish defender match day 1, you'd have to deal with a German attacker in match day 2. But if you went for a Spanish defender in match day 1, you could completely avoid that match day 2 game where Spain played Germany. And the same can be said for some of the German players, some of the attackers there, some of the midfielders even, or even a forward if you want to go for a crazy punt on someone like Moukoko or Havertz or even Gnabry. You could also go for a lot of French players too. A triple France strategy seems to be quite useful because you have that easy matchup versus Australia, which is much better on paper than something like Denmark, which is a team that France have actually historically struggled against, even going back to last World Cup where they only managed to be held to a draw. So the attacking ceiling of someone like Mbappe or even Benzema at match day 2 is much lower compared to match day 1. So that could be why you'd like to go for a match day 2 strategy. Of course, the cons between match day 2 and match day 3 that they both share are that you have much less flexibility in the knockouts. So what happened in Euros is a great case study example for why you might want to save your chip towards the quarterfinals. And what happened there was a lot of people invested in players from the Dutch national team, and we had some additional upsets. And even though you have 4 transfers after the round of 16, if you invested in 4 Dutch players, which you're actually allowed to once you hit the knockout stages, because once you hit the knockout stages, you can actually immediately get 4 players from any team. So if you overinvested in a team like the Netherlands once again, and they got suddenly beaten by an underdog and you lost 4 Netherlands players, you probably have some other players in your team that would have been knocked out as well. And therefore, you need to take additional hits to actually create or recreate a 15-man squad. Saving the wildcard chip could mean you're completely foolproof from any of the problems that might stem from the quarterfinals. It could also allow you to go for a very aggressive punt where you quadruple up on some of the bigger teams where they're favored to score, and you have much more flexibility and coverage over those key options. Let's say if Argentina advanced towards the quarterfinals, have a much easier matchup, you could go for something like Lautaro, Di Maria, Messi, and some other attacker in your team potentially to fully cover the brunt of the Argentina national team, or just go for another midfielder and defender if you really feel like they have such a great game and they're in fantastic form, which they actually seem to be like in the moment, or the same can be said of a team like Brazil. You could alternatively just play a match day 3 wildcard, and what's interesting about this is basically this is like a limitless chip in something like fantasy. You have the opportunity to completely craft your team towards match day 3. You might be able to actually completely avoid all the rest issues. As I said, in previous years, we saw some key players being rested in match day 3, but you would have already alerted yourself to that with a match day 3 wildcard, and you can radically change your team and potentially go for a lot of players that you would not have expected to start, but might actually have the opportunity to shine. So this is a good example where, imagine if you were someone who wildcarded in match day 3, the previous World Cup, where Januzaj actually scored and he wasn't actually a consistent starter for Belgium. That's a very good example of what could happen in match day 3 if you were wildcarding and you went for all these crazy punts. The issue, of course, is that the ceiling could be very, very low, and you once again are inflexible for the knockout stages. And the only issue and the only con I would say for the quarterfinal wildcard is you might have a very low ceiling. Let's say all the overdogs win. Everyone would have probably picked most of these players anyways in their teams, and therefore the actual net advantage you get for wildcarding later and saving your wildcard for the quarterfinals might not be that much. And that's going to be one of the only cons I can really see for the quarterfinals, but I still think it's either the quarterfinals or match day 3 for me, because I think match day 2 is a little bit too aggressive for my liking. If you're someone who really likes to attack and you think you have the strategy to effectively play a limitless in match day 1, and you can really benefit from that whilst also anticipating some of the issues of match day 3, then feel free to go for a match day 2 punt as well. And that's going to be how you can actually utilize the wildcard chip. So those are the 3 chips in fantasy and the great times or the available times for you to use them in your team structure. As I said, it's very team dependent, and it also really depends on how you plan to play this fantasy out, whether you're more of an aggressive manager or whether you're someone who's a little bit more passive, a little bit more defensive maybe, or a little bit more risk averse. For me, as I said, with my chip strategy, I will be using the 12th man. I'm going to use it in match day 1. I think this is a great opportunity to use it because compared to the power captaincy, I think 12th man is a little bit more useful in match day 1 because all the big guns will be playing, and I think there's much more of a higher ceiling there. I'm also less likely to probably need the power captaincy chip because the power captaincy chip almost looks like a get out of jail free card in Monopoly, as opposed to the 12th man where it just really gives you a straight up power buff. And in the 12th man that I would like to use is probably someone like Harry Kane or a Kevin De Bruyne. Kevin De Bruyne plays versus a very attacking Canada team, I'd say probably more attacking than some of the other opponents that Belgium has in this group compared to Morocco and Croatia. As far as Harry Kane, I think he has got a great opportunity to actually be a starter in my team, but I really do like still going for Mbappe. I know Denmark have had a historically great record versus France, but I still think this is a great tournament for Mbappe to still showcase why he's one of the top players in the world, and I still would like to go for Mbappe over Kane, and that's why I'm probably eyeing Kane as a 12th man versus Iran. As far as the wild card, I'll be using it in match day 5, and that means I'll be using it in the round of 8. And because we have round of 16, and because we have the opportunity there to punt on some teams to go 4x on some of the big dogs, I would like to do that and kind of go guns blazing there, as opposed to in match day 2 or match day 3, which are the other opportunities to wildcard. As far as the power captaincy chip, I'm completely flexible right now. As I said, it's a get out of jail free card in Monopoly and in Fantasy in reality for World Cup 2022. And I'm just going to use it when I feel like my team is in a little bit of danger and I'm not very confident in my captain. That's going to be how I'm going to use it. I'm not going to set any plans right now to use the power captaincy chip. I think it's a completely flexible chip and something that's a little bit more defensive as opposed to the more attacking 12th man and the more attacking wild card as well. So that's going to be my chip strategy, and those are the chips explained for World Cup 22 Fantasy. Hope you guys have a wonderful time, and I'll see you guys shortly in the next video.